Hey everyone, so someone asked what the Bitcoin mining profitability would look like in the future when hash rate is measured in exahashes and all that sort of stuff. So first of all, this is more of a technical video. So if you are into Bitcoin just because of Bitcoin, you can skip this one. This goes into the technical Bitcoin mining and what is securing and auditing the Bitcoin network. So if you're not interested in that, just skip this one. You're not going to miss anything as far as your value of Bitcoin. Okay, so assuming you want more of a technical explanation of this, or you care about Bitcoin mining, or you just want to watch all my videos for the sake of completeness because you're a type A personality who likes finishing everything, then here we go. Okay, so right now, Bitcoin miners they're called miners, but their function is to secure and audit the Bitcoin network. That is what they do. They secure and audit the Bitcoin network. And that is happening quintillions of times a second or quadrillions of times a second. Anyway, it's absolutely insane. But all of the Bitcoin network, the Bitcoin miners are constantly securing and auditing the network. And whoever does a better job of that has a higher probability of winning 3.125 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. That number has dropped in half 4 times now, from 50 down to 25, down to 12.5, down to 6.25. And now, as of April 19th of this year, 2024, that block reward is what it's called. The block reward is down to 3.125 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. So the Bitcoin miners are rewarded because whoever works the hardest to secure and audit the network has a higher probability of getting those 3.125 Bitcoin. And statistically over time, it all sort of evens out. If you provide 1% of all of the securing and auditing of the network, over time you will average about 1% of those block rewards. And if you do 0.1%, you'll get about 0.1% of those block rewards. Anyway, but Bitcoin miners are rewarded not just by block rewards, they're also rewarded for the transaction value of all of the transactions in the block that they mine. So in the case of Bitcoin, every block has somewhere between usually about 3,000 to 5,000 transactions in it. And each of those transactions is paying some small amount of money to be included in the block, maybe 25 cents, maybe 75 cents, maybe more for complex transactions or things like that. But anyway, so the Bitcoin miner gets all of those transaction fees. So the way Satoshi Nakamoto set it up was, as the computer systems got more advanced, the network itself would constantly adjust, where the difficulty of securing and auditing the network would keep going up, so that it always took about 10 minutes to mine a new block. And that is updated every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks, the difficulty gets adjusted. So even though the network has gone from something you could run on your home computer to something that is run by massive data centers all over the world, it still takes 10 minutes to mine a block. Okay, so some people worry what's going to happen as the block reward keeps dropping in half and half and half and half until eventually it goes away entirely in the year 2140, which is 116 years, 116. 116 years from now, the block reward will drop in half the very last time, and what's left of it will be so small that it will round down to zero, and there will not be a block reward. Well, what happens at that point is that the miners are rewarded by the transaction value alone. And so the anticipation is, over time, which has been the case, over time, as the block reward has come down, the value of the transactions has gone up, so that about the same amount of total Bitcoin is being rewarded in each block to the Bitcoin miners. It's surprisingly consistent over time. As the block reward comes down, the value of the transactions in the block go up, and the Bitcoin miners are getting paid, in the ballpark of the same amount of money over time, even though obviously that goes up significantly up and down based on the price of Bitcoin. So in the long term, it balances out really beautifully because it's just a slow transition over to transaction fees. Satoshi gave himself a good, almost whatever, from 2009 all the way to 2140. So he gave himself 131 years for that transition to happen. And right now it's, 16 years, 1/6 of those 131 years. It's right on track. Everything is, the miner profitability is right where it needs to be. There's, a strong incentive to mine and secure and audit the Bitcoin network, but not so much so that, Bitcoin miners are taking over the world and its electricity. it still represents a very, a fraction of 1% of worldwide electricity use is a result of Bitcoin mining. So it's using enough electricity that it would be very hard to attack the network. So the network is very, very secure, but it's also using, excuse me. It's also using enough electricity that it's very hard to attack the network, but not so much that it's a real problem with regard to the percentage of electricity used as compared to other things that are valuable in the world. So anyway, that process has been going, I would say right on track, working out beautifully well, just as Satoshi envisioned. Sorry, like hay fever or something like this. The one thing about Facebook Live videos is if you're sneezing, you can't just cut it out, right? It's live. And the reason I do these live videos is because I figure it's all I have time for. So I'm either going to get it on the first shot or I'm not doing it at all. And so obviously I record everything and it's one take and you just get what you get. Someday I'm going to be running for some political office and all they're going to do is like show clips of me sneezing because somebody's going to go dredge up this footage from the past. But anyway, all that to say, the way the Bitcoin network works, it's been working exactly as intended. The Bitcoin miners are transitioning to transaction fees. Their fixed costs in mining hardware is always going to be there regardless, and so it's just a matter of needing electricity to run the mining computers. And as long as the electricity costs 1 penny less than it costs to mine on the Bitcoin network, it makes sense to run those computers and mine on the Bitcoin network. So anyway, so all that to say, the whole system was engineered from scratch with a beautiful balance of nice long runtime, and 16 years in, I think everybody would say it's working out much more sort of beautifully and perfectly than even Satoshi Nakamoto himself could have predicted, as far as the total Bitcoin hash rate, the total security and auditability, auditing of the network. Like all of those things are just really beautifully right on track. And anyway, so what happens to the Bitcoin miners long term? Well, the answer is they get paid by transaction fees. And just like the video I just did about how Bitcoin scales, they get the transaction fees become higher and higher and higher value over time. So they will long-term more than make up for the block rewards that are fading away. And people will use higher layers such as the Lightning Network for payments and things like that. So even if it costs $1 or $2 or $3 or $5 or even much more to transact on the Bitcoin base layer, the vast majority of people are not going to transact on the Bitcoin base layer. They're going to transact on higher layers such as the Bitcoin Lightning Network. And essentially they'll use the Bitcoin base layer for long-term savings, long-term storage, that sort of stuff for relatively, comparatively larger amounts, certainly not buying a cup of coffee and that sort of thing. So anyway, Bitcoin mining is set to be profitable forever. The game theory that's set up for the way it works is really brilliant. And I don't anticipate, what's funny is every time the Bitcoin fees start getting high, people they start worrying about the electricity use of Bitcoin mining. And then when the transaction fees get a little too low, people worry that there's not enough security and auditing of the network, which technically it's like, vastly above what it is even remotely hackable. So we're like a long way from, I would say the network is massively oversecured, oversecured and over audited, which is exactly what you want when you have a huge percent of your net worth in something, is it for it to be extremely audited and extremely secure. But anyway, it's about half the time people are worried that the Bitcoin network is using too much electricity for security and auditing, and the other half the time they're worried that transaction fees are too low and there's not going to be enough auditing and enough security, which to me tells me we're about at the sweet spot. Because if about 80% of the time nobody's talking about it, and about 10% of the time people feel like it's too far one way, and about 10% of the time people feel like it's too far the other way, it's one of the rare instances when it seems like we've hit the exact sweet spot. So if somebody said, hey, you can, manipulate or alter the Bitcoin code and make mining more profitable right now, I would not do that. If somebody said, hey, you can manipulate or alter the Bitcoin code and make it less profitable, I would also not do that. So to me, it's about perfect right now. And the way things have been going, even after the next halving in 2028 and the next halving in 2032, on and on and on until 2140 and beyond, I think the way Satoshi Nakamoto set it up is basically perfect. And I don't anticipate there being an issue with profitability of Bitcoin mining even well into hundreds of years in the future. I think Bitcoin mining will be extremely profitable, no matter what, far, far, far into the future, far, again, hundreds or even thousands or tens of thousands of years into the future. So, as always, hope it helps. Sorry for all the sneezing. I think this video had more sneezing in it than all of my other videos combined. So, have a great night. I'm always here for anything you need. Thanks.